At 6:02 in the morning, the knock comes. Not the kind you ignore. Not the kind you mistake for a neighbor. Federal agents, hard fists against a front door, before most people in the Bronx are even awake. Inside is a man who built his name on numbers. To some, he was just a tax preparer. To others, something closer to a miracle worker. A man who could look at a pile of forms, a year of stress, and somehow make the burden feel lighter. People came to him worried. They left relieved. And over time, they gave him a name that sounded less like business and more like mythology. The Magician. Because for years, Rafael Alvarez had a reputation for making taxes disappear. Lower bills, bigger refunds, problems solved. At least, that's what it looked like. But on this morning, there was no trick left to perform. No smiling clients. No busy office. No stack of returns waiting on a desk. Just agents at the door. And the beginning of the end. Because after years of making the IRS's money disappear, the IRS had finally come to make him disappear. By the time it was over, the numbers barely sounded real. Around 90,000 tax returns. A decade of fraud. Roughly $145 million in losses to the US government. And at the center of it all, a neighborhood businessman running a tax office in the Bronx. Not from some hidden compound, not from an offshore island, from a storefront people trusted. Families walked in there. Workers walked in there. Small business owners walked in there carrying envelopes, receipts, W-2s, and hope. And year after year, many walked back out believing the same thing. That Rafael Alvarez could do what nobody else could. He could fix it. He could make the numbers work. He could make the tax bill shrink. To his customers, that wasn't fraud. That was skill. That was why they called him the Magician. But prosecutors would later describe something very different. Not brilliance, not strategy. A system, a long-running scheme built on false deductions, fake losses, and returns that were never true to begin with. So, the question isn't just how he did it. It's this. How does a neighborhood tax man become one of the biggest tax fraudsters in America, while people thanked him for it? From the outside, there was nothing unusual about it. A tax office on Broadway in the Bronx. The kind of place people pass without thinking twice. No armed guards, no tinted windows, no sign that anything inside was extraordinary. Just a business with a steady stream of clients, especially when tax season hit. And when it did, the place filled up. Families came in carrying folders. Workers showed up with forms folded in their pockets. Immigrants, hourly employees, small business owners, people trying to stretch every dollar they had. They weren't looking for anything illegal. They were looking for help. Someone who knew the system. Someone who could do what they couldn't. And inside that office, Rafael Alvarez had built exactly that image. Reliable, experienced, connected. A local businessman who understood how money worked, how taxes worked, how to get results. That part mattered most. Because in neighborhood businesses, reputation spreads faster than advertising. One good refund turns into 10 new clients. One relieved customer tells friends, cousins, co-workers. And before long, trust becomes automatic. That was A-Tax. Not a place people feared. A place they returned to, year after year, which is what made it so effective. Because the most dangerous fronts usually don't look dangerous at all. They look familiar. They look helpful. They look like somewhere you'd recommend to your family. The nickname didn't come from nowhere. It came from results. Clients would walk in expecting the usual disappointment. A tax bill they couldn't afford. A refund smaller than they hoped. Another year of numbers, refusing to bend in their favor. And then Alvarez would get involved. Suddenly, the outcome changed. Liabilities dropped. Refunds grew. Losses appeared where there hadn't been any before. People left feeling like something impossible had just happened on paper. That's how reputations are built. It didn't look dramatic. No duffel bags. No weapons. No masked men forcing open steel doors. This because Rafael Alvarez didn't steal with guns. He stole with checkboxes. According to prosecutors, the method was simple enough to hide in plain sight. Each one on its own might seem small. A line here, a figure there, but stacked together across thousands of returns, the effect was massive. Tax bills dropped. Refunds grew. Clients saw savings. The government saw losses. And the real power of the scheme wasn't just the false entries. It was repetition. Once a pattern worked, it could be reused, adjusted, copied, run again, and again, and again. until fraud stopped looking like a one-off lie and started looking like a business model. By the time the government fully described what was happening, this wasn't being framed as a few bad returns. It was an operation, a system that ran for years and moved at volume. Employees were part of it. Court filings describe workers being trained on what to enter, what to leave alone, and what not to question. Some were told to copy numbers from prior returns. Some were directed to keep fabricated figures in place even when they didn't fit the client in front of them. And when people pushed back, the response wasn't curiosity. It was pressure. Prosecutors said Alvarez intimidated employees and kept tight control over the process. That matters, because fraud at this scale doesn't survive on improvisation. It survives on routine. The same tricks repeated so often, they start to feel normal. The same false losses. The same inflated deductions. The same outcomes delivered over and over to thousands of people who never saw the machinery behind the curtain. For years, the pattern kept working. Returns went out. Refunds came back. Clients stayed loyal. The office stayed busy. But somewhere inside the IRS, numbers were beginning to look wrong. Not one return, not two. Patterns, repeated deductions, repeated losses. The kind of consistency that doesn't happen naturally across thousands of unrelated people. In 2017, investigators moved closer. An IRS revenue agent interviewed Alvarez about suspicious filings connected to the business. This was the moment when routine scrutiny could have become something much bigger. Instead, according to prosecutors, it became something else. False statements, misleading explanations, and one especially revealing move. An employee was allegedly directed to impersonate another associate in order to obtain a preparer tax identification number, or PTIN, a credential needed to file returns. The first real blow didn't come in handcuffs. It came in paperwork. In 2021, the United States filed a civil action to shut the operation down. No dramatic chase, no flashing lights, just the government stepping in to say enough. The result was devastating. Rafael Alvarez and ATAX were permanently barred from preparing federal tax returns for others. For a man whose reputation was built on tax season, it was more than a legal restriction. It was the removal of his stage. The storefront that once promised relief now carried a different meaning. The business model was broken. The image was damaged. Clients who once saw expertise now had reason to question everything. But this wasn't the end. Civil cases stop conduct. They don't always punish it. April 15th, 2024, Tax Day. Across America, millions of people were filing returns, checking refunds, or trying not to think about either one. And in New York, federal agents were moving on a man who had made a career out of all three. Rafael Alvarez was arrested as sealed charges were unsealed in federal court. The timing was impossible to ignore. On the one day Americans think about taxes, the magician was finally charged. The indictment laid out what prosecutors believed had really happened behind the Bronx storefront. For customers who once praised him, the contrast was brutal. The man who seemed to understand the system better than anyone else was now accused of abusing it at scale. By December 2024, the performance was over. Rafael Alvarez appeared in federal court and pleaded guilty. Not to every charge originally filed, but to 2 core counts tied to the scheme prosecutors had spent years building. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, and aiding the preparation of a false tax return. The admission mattered because it stripped away the final defense that this had all been misunderstanding or bookkeeping gone wrong. Months later, in May 2025, sentencing arrived. 4 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release after that. Restitution, $145 million to the IRS, and forfeiture of more than $11.8 million, money the government said came from the fraud itself. For a man once celebrated for lowering tax bills, the ending was mathematical in its own way. Even after the guilty plea, the case left questions behind. How does a scheme involving tens of thousands of returns last roughly a decade? How were patterns that large not stopped earlier? Why did warning signs in 2017 not end it immediately? How many clients truly understood what was being entered in their names? And how many simply trusted the person across the desk? That question matters. Because fraud built through trust is harder to spot than fraud built through force. Then there's the issue of scale. Operations this large often require systems, staff, repetition, cooperation. So were others knowingly involved? Were some pressured? Were some simply following instructions inside a workplace that normalized falsehoods? And finally, there's the uncomfortable, broader question. How many similar schemes never become headlines at all? Because this case wasn't uncovered through one dramatic moment. It was uncovered through patterns in paperwork, which means the biggest crimes can sometimes hide in the most ordinary places. Rafael Alvarez made people believe he could erase taxes, that with enough expertise, enough experience, enough confidence, the burden could simply disappear. For thousands of clients, he looked like a solution. For years, the office stayed busy. The nickname stayed alive. The illusion stayed intact. But numbers don't care about reputation. They don't care about charm. They don't care how long a lie has been repeated. They sit quietly in databases, records, filings, and totals, waiting, and eventually, patterns begin to speak. That may be the real lesson of this case. The fraud was clever. The image was convincing. The front looked ordinary, but numbers don't vanish. They wait, and eventually, they come back.